Hello to all those wonderful UK column viewers and listeners, wherever you are in the world. I am very pleased to have a lady join me today who is Jewish, and she's kindly agreed to talk to me about what it is to be Jewish, tell me a little bit about her life, and also for us to have a discussion so that I can learn, because as I said in the little bit of discussion off camera, I've gone through quite an extensive life now, where I've obviously come into contact with Jewish people, but this hasn't been anything that's been particularly significant. I haven't had friends who've specifically identified themselves as being Jewish. I can believe that I've come into contact with, and indeed maybe had some friends who might be Jewish or connections with Israel, but it been hasn't been something that's openly featured in my life. So I'm really here to learn, and I think we're going to have a very interesting discussion, Lynn. Thank you very much for joining me. It's a privilege.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Can we start at the beginning? So you were born in Israel. I'm not going to ask you when you were born, um, but you were born in Israel. What can you tell us about that and memories that you have of being a young child growing up in Israel?
Well, actually, I was a child growing up in Israel, but I was born in England. I guess it's a bit confusing because I've lived all over the place, and you know, shortly after I was born, I moved, to a different country, and then to Israel, and then and so on and so forth. So, but I did live in Israel as a child, yes. So,
And
what can I tell you about that? Well, first of all, at that point, Israel, Judaism. First of all, I don't even know what it means to be Jewish, and I think that it at this point it's so confused and so confusing that I really don't know how to describe that. But at that point, it was very confused with Zionism. So especially, there was secular Zionists, and so Judaism was confused with some kind of connection to Israel. And so that was my understanding as a child. Um, it it seemed to me to be very, first of all, ha having grown up with this idea of having been persecuted, throughout the ages for no reason and so on and so forth, and being a descendant of I'm not trying to play the Holocaust card, but it's there. As a child, I knew that, members of my family had been murdered, and why? Because we were Jewish. So that provides an impetus for then looking for a safe place for a young child, and so Israel seemed to be that safe place. Of course, now we know it's not. It's the most dangerous place.
how old were you when you went from England? So you were born into a Jewish family, and then you went to Israel as a child. How old were you when you went to Israel then?
I must have been about five or so, four, five.
Okay, and how long did you stay in Israel for?
Well, we were back and forth. I don't remember. Let's say a year, that time when we were considering moving there permanently. But then we were back and forth after that. Yeah. There was this Zionist idea of a homeland, of a place where we would be safe from persecution. This is this is the myth that we bought into. I mean, what I think now is that we were duped, in many ways, and we can see that playing out now. But at that point, that was what, and also, um, there were there were various ideals involved of like I mean, for instance, later, no, I'm jumping now to later when I joined the kibbutz movement and worked on the land, and there are these ideals, um and I haven't really worked out to myself, I think that some of those the ideals are wonderful, but in practice it didn't work out that way at all, as we can see. But my parents, my mother didn't really care one way or the other, but my father was strongly Zionist.
All right, okay. And I have heard a few stories about people who worked on a kibbutz, and some of the ones that I remember, they clearly enjoyed themselves at the time from the point of view that they were young and they were working with other young people, and there was very good rapport amongst the team on the kibbutz. What sort of experience did you have? I mean, it was obviously hard work. I think a lot of people thought they were going to go and it was going to be a complete summer holiday, but actually they did have to work. How did you find being on a kibbutz?
Well, I loved it. I loved it. I was young and I got up at dawn or just before dawn and went and worked in the fields until the sun got so hot that it wasn't possible to be outside anymore, at which time we went inside and we did some packing and other things that we could do inside. And then at night there were bonfires and singing, and it was a wonderful feeling. I would say it's almost tribal. It was at that point, and actually maybe it's become even more tribal now, I don't know. But there's this feeling of belonging, and I think most children and young people are looking for a sense of identity and belonging, and sometimes they look in the wrong places. So, later on they find, well, that wasn't exactly what I was looking for, but at that point, um, there was this sense of this myth of building the land, but it wasn't our land to build. That's what I found out later.
Was the kibbutz movement, was that actually a grassroots movement, or or was the idea of bringing young people to work on the kibbutz, was it an idea that was actually designed to try and help cement some feeling that you were uh, um as Jewish men and women, and boys and girls, teenagers, that you had roots with the land? Was it a genuine thing, or do you think there was a little bit of um, uh, sort of policy behind it?
Oh, definitely policy. I'm trying to remember, there was this idea of among Zionists, the progenitors of Zionism, that the Jews had brought on their own um, annihilation because they were so weak, because they were so, they were involved with book learning and so on and so forth. And so that was going to be pushed away. And now there was this quote, new Jew who was going to be tough and, work the land and it was going to be a militarized state and so on. So it was really almost I would say an anti-Semitic, well, I don't like that word, all right, but it was certainly pushing away the old idea of the Jews and trying to build a completely different version of Judaism, which was really Zionism and which was opposed to the idea of Jews as being a religious group involved with book learning and ethics and so on. It was supplanting that.
And did you those observations, what you've just said to me, did you pick up those feelings at the time, or the statements you've just made, were they more a reflection after you looked back on what you'd experienced in your time on the kibbutz?
No, I didn't pick up those feelings at the time, but I do remember some feelings of unease when I was like meeting IDF soldiers coming back from the front, and this this feeling of there was a feeling of unease, and there was something off, and I didn't know what it was. It was only later that I talked to people from other countries and cultures, and I began slowly working out what the issue was, and actually finding out that these people who I thought were so heroic might not have been.
And I was teasing a little bit earlier about timescales and things. So when you talk about the front, are we talking about around 60s, 1967, that time, or earlier?
I was there in 1967, yes.
Right, right. So obviously a critical time with the war as it unfolded. Yeah. And so were you there while the fighting, well, presumably you were, if you were talking about soldiers coming back from the front, the fighting was actually happening while you were there on the kibbutz.
No, I went out immediately after
Right.
the Israel had won
Yeah.
that
Short, sharp
war,
war.
yes.
Yes. Yes. And of
And so
course,
the soldiers were coming back triumphant, and what I didn't know was about the other side of things and what they'd actually done. Um, and when I found that out, it was devastating. But that didn't happen for years.
okay. So what makes, do you just finish your time on the kibbutz and therefore it's time to come back to England, or uh, was it uh, uh, was it you feeling that you wanted to come back? What made you come back from Israel?
Well, I was involved with someone who I later married, who was, living in England. And whether I would have come back had that not been the case, I don't know.
And when you come back to England, you well, you settle down, you get married, and are you living a very involved Jewish life? How
Not
did
at
your
all.
how did your faith come into it? I mean, what was life like as a Jewish person? Was it? I would be saying to somebody Christian, maybe, were you a churchgoer? And they might say, yes, we were heavily involved with the church. Was the synagogue a central part of your life back in England, or not?
Well, first of all, I didn't stay very long in England, and I was off to different countries in the Middle East, and then also, to America. So I wasn't in England for that long. But no, the synagogue was more of a community space. It wasn't really. Um, I was never religious in the sense of, I wasn't sure about the whole thing, and I hadn't really looked into it, but um no, the idea of I think I really hadn't worked it out to myself. I only looked into it more as time went by.
This is a really interesting thing for me, and I think other people, because I think that a lot of people um, outside of the Jewish community look in, and there's an assumption made that to be Jewish is automatically to be deeply embedded inside the Jewish faith. And you're saying that wasn't the case for you, and that was something you was learning.
No,
So
not at all.
this is very, this is a very key point. And it's a start of the little journey into the fact that to me, speaking as being a non-Jew, it's there are so many different facets, it appears, to what being a Jew is. It it isn't what just one thing, because it
Not
seems to
at
me
all.
that that you all feel very different things about yourself, and then that might be based on something which is faith based, or it might be something that's based on political things, or it might be just the thing that you've been born in Israel and therefore that cements your idea of being Jewish. For me, this is really fascinating, and it's one of the reasons that I've been very, very keen to get an interview. I hope there's going to be a series of them talking to Jewish people about what it means to be Jewish and how they see the world. So it's fascinating that you've stepped into this little arena. If you travelled then in the Middle East, uh, well, I don't know whether you can say where you went, but you're traveling as a Jewish person. Did that cause any problems at the time, particularly if it was after the Six Day War?
No, well, first of all, I didn't travel to the countries where it would have been dangerous to travel, but I where I did travel, there was no problem at all. I mean, first of all, I don't think anyone actually, maybe at the airport, people would have checked out our passports and found that it said we were Jewish, but once we were in the country, I was often stopped and mistaken for I don't know, someone who was from that part of the area. So I don't think that it was a learning experience. There was a um th in those cultures there's a hospitality and warmth and sense of family that I think that we in the West may have lost to a great extent. Um and but but at that point they still had that. I don't know whether that's the case anymore. But no, it never really came out. I was very interested in the way that they thought and, learning about a different culture.
Right. But you are talking about Middle Eastern countries, are you, when you're
Yes,
talking about traveling in the
yeah.
area? Yeah, that's fascinating. I would totally agree with you. I think that it's very apparent that many of those Middle Eastern cultures have absolutely kept on to family life and what that means, even, you know, quite extensive families. That is regarded as a vital part to being alive and being and here in the West in my lifetime I've seen extraordinary changes with how the family is viewed and how the family is treated, and we've seen people, well, we're seeing families broken apart, I think is what we're seeing in the West. So I regard it as a very good thing when you see cultures where they're still keeping the family strong. So that's interesting.
What struck me also, I mean, there was definitely a secular culture, but there were also people of very strong faith and who shared that faith, and I was just very interested in how they saw the world. And they were fascinated with me and with us because some of them had never met anyone like us. So I mean, there were some incredible encounters, I'm sure things have changed since then. But yeah, so it was very interesting. Also very scary because of the poverty in some of these places, where people people are pushed into situations which are absolutely horrible because of the poverty.
I've only ever seen real poverty on one occasion, and that was in my Navy time when we had a visit to Somalia. And I remember in a town square, people sitting with tiny plates covered with maybe three or four green beans or some peas, and they were trying to sell these vegetables in order to get some money to buy other things. And of course, they were all grossly underfed. really very difficult to look at, some of them, and the children particularly difficult to look at. And that was actually a visit where I learned a lot because at the time the West was shipping in a lot of grain. I'm talking very early 80s. And outside the harbour in Mogadishu, there were a lot of grain ships anchored. And this grain was supposedly coming in to deal with poverty in Somalia. But what was happening was that corrupt politicians were simply rebagging the grain, and it was being exported, and they were raking in the profit. So they were doing this while their own people starved, and I've never forgotten that visit.
Well, I remember the some of the children were intentionally crippled, so they would be, standing in the street begging for anything they could get. Um, and they were crippled. The hands were crippled, or their like one of their legs were chopped off, or something like that. And I mean, it was just horrible. It was really horrible. And I was told, I don't know whether it was the case, that their parents had done this in order for them to survive. So, I'd never come across that in the quotes developed world. So there was a lot, it was a learning experience.
When was it that you made the big move from England to America?
Just after when I was very, very young, I spent several years in America and then came back, and then I went back in the 70s.
Okay, so all right, so you'd had experience in England and Israel and come back to England, been back and forth and seen some other Middle Eastern countries. So let's say when you make the final big move to America, that was in the 1970s, was it?
That was in the 70s, the time when I really made the big move was late 70s.
Correct me if I'm wrong on this, but one of the things I think you were saying to me earlier was that you found the atmosphere in America very different. Being a Jew and going to America, you found that a refreshing experience because you could be amongst some quite big Jewish communities, and nobody, what's the expression, batted an eyelid. You were just one of any other person that was there. Is that true?
I wasn't part of a Jewish community. I just found that I didn't have to be as careful, that the whole culture, that even the words, it was simply much more a part of the fabric of American life than it was of British life at that point. And I was just amazed. And no, I wasn't part of the Jewish community, but there, I think there is a very large Jewish community there, and maybe that was one of the reasons that these phrases and this culture became in some way integrated into American culture in a way that it wasn't in Britain.
And so you stay in America, and effectively you have what the bulk of your life there as family,
Hmm.
as mother, professional career. That's all
Yes,
based in America.
sometime in England, I'm coming back, but based in America, yes.
Yeah. So looking back, did you enjoy it? Let's do some nice things. How did you find America?
Well, yes, I did enjoy it. It was very exciting. I was at that point at the the epicenter of what was really going on in my field. And I mean, it was very exciting. It was very, very tough environment, but I loved it, and I was very lucky, to have met some absolutely outstanding people, and so I had a great time.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I've had numerous visits to America, and I've always enjoyed them. Um, with with some experience of the east and west coast. And I'll say out of my visits, probably it was Arizona that I was very taken with. That's the first time I've ever been let loose near desert areas, but I found that really spectacular.
No, I've never been to Arizona, but I did live on the West Coast too, and that's very different. I mean, this was at a time when San Francisco was a beautiful place. I gather it's not anymore, but that's a different that's completely different from the East Coast. And of course, they're the flyover zones. People on the coast think, well, they're just places to fly over, but actually, if one gets the chance to go there, that's very interesting. That's a different culture too. So it's not. I don't think that America is just one homogeneous society at all any more than Britain is.
When you're living in America, well, let's say you're established in America. When you were in that environment, were you following politics concerning Israel when events were happening around Israel? Was that an important thing for you, or was your life totally immersed in being there in American and enjoying and experiencing American life?
I didn't really follow what was going on in Israel. I mean, I was very immersed in my career and in what was going on in America. I really, at that point, didn't question anything, and I feel a certain amount of guilt about that at this point.
Well, I think we can all look back over our lives, and there were things that we should have done at a particular time and we didn't do. That's part of the advantage of getting more mature and looking back. You're allowed to say, I probably didn't get that right. This is a question which I want to ask as many people as I can. Really, is you're there in America. Are you American or are you Jewish or are you English? And I say it like that because it's just I've only started to learn about this business, and a while back I listened to a really interesting discussion between two rabbis who were talking about dual nationality. And actually they were quite strong on the fact that for them, one man was American born, so he said, I am an American, and I that's how I think first. I am an American, even though he was a rabbi. And then the other rabbi was actually born in England, but his wife was American, and he was about to get um, uh, residential status in America. But these two rabbis were talking about why they felt it was important that as Jewish people, you had to be one side of the line or the other, and their view was that they were Americans, and that's where their loyalty lay. But I just find this is a very interesting thing. If you're born in one country, even if you're born in Italy and then you live in UK for an extended period, you have the family and everything else. Do you do you do you think as a fact that you're British, you live in what a funny land we are. You're British, you live in UK or you're English, or do you still think you're Italian even though you've lived here for 40 years? How did you regard yourself? Did one thing come before the other, or was it something you didn't think about?
No, I did think about it. And I decided, well, first of all, I was very proud of being British, being English. And although I could have become an American citizen, of course, I didn't do so. Um, and yeah, there are dual citizens, but um, I just felt British. I'd had had a British upbringing and gone to British schools and so on, and I was very proud of my heritage. As for the well, I think it was an accident partly that I didn't end up in Israel because I could have easily done so, and so that was an accident. But I was quite honestly, I was confused. Um, about, where does my loyalty lie? If this is our homeland, then why are we living in England? And if we moved, or well, we were considering moving permanently to Israel, then why did we come back? And I was just confused. Uh, but but I think I just had a very strong identity as a British person and wherever I went. And at that point, there wasn't, and things have changed since then, but at that point, um, I didn't call into question many political aspects of being part of a dying empire, let's put it like that. I didn't think like that. Yeah, I was very naive.
Thank you for telling me that because, as I say, I do find this aspect very, very interesting. And yeah, that particular discussion with the rabbis, I listened to intently all the way through as they discussed various points, and that was maybe one of the deeper YouTube videos, which it started my learning process on matters to do what it is to be Jewish. So eventually, you decide that you're going to come back to England, and that was fairly recently, if I remember correctly. And you decide to live in a big city. Um, you said to me that it was a bit of a shock coming back to UK. Why was that?
Because everything has changed. Well, I don't live in a big city, and I miss being in a big city in many ways, but I decided not to do that. But it was a shock because we had, I remember a vibrant culture where uh, we had debates. We were able to talk about different opinions and without coming to blows over it. It wasn't a question of, we could hurt other people's feelings and regularly did because we had different views on things. And now everything has changed and I feel we're losing this great tradition of ours. Um, and it's very sad. It's engineered, but it's very sad.
How long were you away for in America? Uh, How many years did you live there then,
Oh
roughly?
my goodness. Oh, I don't know, decades.
Yeah, so I'm asking that just to get an idea of when you say UK has changed, over what period. But essentially, you're talking about UK changing over my lifetime, my adult lifetime, and I totally agree with you. I think the country is unrecognizable in 2025 as to what it was back in certainly if I say back in the 1970s, or I could go back as a young boy before that. The change
Yes.
is incredible, and it's not for the better in the way people relate to each other.
No, absolutely. And I began to see it, say, in the 90s. I wasn't living here, but I began to see it in the 80s, 90s. But then I wasn't here. And then coming back, it seems like it's a different country.
Yeah. The other thing that you mentioned to me was that you uh, felt, I will say you felt a bit of unease coming back and being Jewish. Is that correct? when you came back to UK? You were worried about what was happening in America. You leave America and you come to England, and then you sense you're feeling a bit uneasy here, maybe more than you expected to. So what was that unease all about?
Well, I think there's a lot of conversation right now, and it started. I don't know when it started, but I became aware of it about, you know, well, are the Jews instigators of all that do they believe that they're chosen, and are they instigators of all that we're going through in, all our problems? Is it the Jews' fault? And so there's that undercurrent, even if people don't say it. Not everyone, obviously, but there's an undercurrent of that. People are looking around and trying to figure out what's going on. And there's no question, but there are not me, but there are some very wealthy Jews who have an agenda. So I found myself even recently, saying, well, actually, I may be Jewish. I'm not even sure about that, but let's say I am. But um, I don't think we're the chosen people. I don't think we're better than anyone else. And it was a relative of mine who isn't Jewish who said to me, "I'm so glad you said that. Thank goodness you said that, because it was like, if I hadn't said that, she might not have wanted anything to do with me."
The other thing which you have said to me, and indeed a couple of other people who are Jewish who are kind enough to talk to me, is that it's not only a feeling of a little bit of fear about how people are reacting around you because you're Jewish, it's also a little bit of fear of criticizing the state of Israel itself. And this is something which, again, has been something which I've had to learn from a position of not knowing very much about Israel as a country at all. The idea that division inside the country was so significant that some people have been badly treated by the government, but also that they are very nervous of even criticizing the government. And perhaps I'll just add a little extra statement on that. How interesting that here we are in UK in 2025, where people are being certainly brought before the court for saying nasty things about the government. So there's certain things that are happening on a level playing field. But for you as a speaking to me as somebody with experience of Israel, I find this fact that people in the Jewish community are frightened of their own government. I find this a very interesting point.
Well, I'm not particularly frightened of criticizing Israel. In fact, I do it all the time. But I I think that it's very difficult to remain part of the larger Jewish community and criticize Israel, although people are starting to do that more now. But no, I mean, but within Israel, it used to be that everyone was criticizing is Israeli policies and arguing about everything on earth. It was a very free society for people who were Jewish and not for the others. But I think that's completely changed now. And now, people who speak out are more isolated than they used to be. There's no question. But I don't consider Israel has anything to do with being Jewish. For me, it doesn't. And you can talk to quite a few rabbis who would say, Judaism is a religion. It 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 doesn't have to do with a country, and even the name Israel or Jerusalem, they are symbolic. They're not necessarily located in a particular piece of land that is in the Middle East. That may be convenient in some ways, but it's not necessarily what we mean when we say Israel or Jerusalem, you know. That's that's a symbolic, allegorical, spiritual journey, and it's not to do with a material place for me.
This is probably an impossible question, but you will have a better idea than I will. But out of the Jewish community in UK, can you give any idea of your best guess of what percentage of people would align with what you've just said versus people who would be more vehement that their home and their heart is in the country and the and with the political state of Israel?
I really don't know, but I think it's a minority. But you know, I'm not really aligned with any community, and I don't know. I mean, there are some ultra-Orthodox sects who are very outspoken about this, and I'm not part of them. But if you look at the literature and the tradition, it's it seems it seems quite clear that what's being talked about is a spiritual journey. If it wasn't a spiritual journey, then it wouldn't be a religion. It would be some kind of a, well, something else, let's put it like that. And so that's the way I see it. And you know, I'm not intending on um, denigrating anyone, but I think that if but to be true to the real tradition, you know, as I learn more about it, it's important and not to be confused by all these other political considerations which have to do with empire.
You were kind enough, well, I expressed to you my difficulties in actually being able to talk to and interview some Jewish people. I put out some feelers and there were a couple that I was very keen to do an interview with, but um, I won't mention names or organisations, but one lady that I exchanged some really nice emails with, and I thought she's definitely going to give me an interview. And then there was a pause of a week, and she talked about speaking to the committee. And having spoken to the committee in the organisation, she then sent me a very polite but rather cold email saying that unfortunately she didn't think it was appropriate for her to talk to me. So for me, working as a journalist, trying to understand more about how Israelis, how Jewish people feel about what's happening in the world at the moment, it's very difficult. I found it very difficult to engage. And I'd like to thank you because you've been kind enough to suggest a couple of people who may also speak to me. So we'll see what happens with that. But yeah, a learning point that when you approach Jewish people to say, tell me more about yourself and how you view the world and how you view Israel, there is a certain reticence for whatever reason. And I hope that, well, you've been brave enough to speak with me, but at least I'm now on the path to being able to have some discussions with Jewish people. So I want to say a big thank you for that. We live in a particularly volatile time at the moment, don't we, with events in Gaza. And I can tell you in no uncertain terms that when the troubles, that this recent trouble started in Israel and Gaza, the reaction of many members of the established members of the UK column audience was truly, for me, astonishing. We had from people who would start an email saying that how devout they were as Christians. We had some of the most unpleasant emails we have ever had. And those emails were sent on the basis that we, the UK column, had dared to criticise Israel. And one person said to me that because, in their opinion, I'd criticised Israel, I was effectively damned. And I consider myself I consider myself a Christian, and it's very interesting how many people in our audience are on a spiritual journey at the moment, and I think their faith is growing. And I meet some lovely people, but the trouble, the fighting and the war in Israel, and then what subsequently is taking place in Gaza, created a real division in our audience, which was quite something. How do you feel about the situation in the Middle East at the moment? And can you tell us how, you know, how it makes you feel? And probably also what would you like to see happen?
If I could start with the second part of it first, maybe, because one always has to hold out some hope, but I think there is a movement to try, and it sounds impossible, but the only hope I see is of there being eventually one democratic state in which people of any religion or color or whatever political persuasion can live in peace with each other. And in holding out that hope, I'm not a utopian. I tried that and it didn't work. I just know that anything else is not going to work. And so that's the direction and it does seem impossible right now, but that's the direction of travel for me and for people who I respect. As for what's happening now, it's beyond barbaric. I don't expect that Israel can ever recover from what it is doing. And I didn't know that I would be so shocked and appalled, and I'm almost speechless. Actually, Gabo Mate recently gave a speech, and he said, I I'm speechless. I don't have the words anymore, so I'm going to read from people who have found the words, and that's what he did. And that's what I feel. It's really leaving me speechless, and distraught, and a great deal of pain. And I just hope that peace eventually prevails, but right now it's looking dark.
It's looking dark, and it has been truly horrible to see what's happening. Death wherever it occurs and destruction is bad. And when it's magnified, when it's happening in big areas to lots of people, it's particularly cruel. Um, I live in a country, the United Kingdom, where in 2025 I see well, not my prime minister, I have to put up with him, but I see Keir Starmer, who, when he's been asked about the situation in the Middle East, shows absolutely no sympathy or empathy or any drive at all to stop what's happening and to start to bring peace and a sensible approach to what's happening in the Middle East. And this is something that I find fascinating because I don't know what my own prime minister is because articles in the mainstream press seem to indicate that he's not actually Jewish himself. He's married to a Jewish lady, although he does admit to attending a synagogue. And so again, I've now got this problem that here's the British Prime Minister. Where does his actual heart lie? Is it with UK or is it actually with Israel? And if it's with Israel, is it with the wider people of Israel or is it simply with the Zionist government? And I find this not only unsettling, I find this very, very annoying. I'm saying it with a smile on my face, but it's a very serious subject. Many years ago, I was happy to report, because it was factually correct, that our then Prime Minister David Cameron, Conservative Party, said that his support for Israel was unshakable. And I pointed out that if his support for Israel was unshakable, it meant that Israel came first and UK came second. And I didn't ever get too much pushback for saying that, but I was telling the truth. I even, put the biblical quote in that no man can have two masters because he will love one and hate the other. And I felt justified in saying that. But this brings us back to this conundrum of people acting in the interests of Israel, but are they? And what does Israel mean? It's quite confusing, but it is apparent that the political government in Israel is immensely powerful and ruthless.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And they have, just look at the way that Israel was founded. And the present government is the direct, and what's happening now is simply a magnified version of how it was founded. So I think there's no mystery there. And of course, you know, Israel is a nuclear state. It may not admit it most of the time, but it's a nuclear state. And and it's not necessarily a rational state. The leaders are not necessarily rational about their own country, their own people. Are they in fact doing their best for their own people, or or is something else happening? So it's a very dangerous situation. But as for Keir Starmer and the government, well, you know, what can I say? I don't know the story behind what his decisions, but I don't think they're for the best of the British people. But I'm sure they're not. You know and this complete heartlessness about the suffering of, we're all human beings, whatever our color or faith or whatever, we're all human beings. So how can he be? There are people who are starving to death, and how can this be ignored? I simply don't understand.
Yeah. Well, it's a lack of humanity. I think, Lynn, we see a growing lack of humanity across humanity. So it affects people of different colours, faiths, countries. What we need to be looking for is what's inside each individual. I think that is how we should be starting to measure people. Uh, Something that just pops into my mind is that you were kind enough not long ago to send me a poem which was about the planting of trees in Israel. It was quite poignant because it was to do with planting of trees to reforest areas that were originally Palestinian villages. And are you able just to tell us a little bit more about the origins of that poem?
I wanted to mention, that it's not just about the trees, it's about Sykes-Picot and the British role in dividing up that land, but there are lots of issues there, dividing the land and then the lies that had to go along with it all in order to the stories, the narratives and so on. So
This is a poem that you sent to me, and I loved it. I thought it was a really nice poem, but also I was interested in the background. And then you said to me that basically you've written a lot of poems. So
a
let's
lot, but
okay. S- um, okay.
quite a
So
few. I can send you more if you like.
okay. What was the motivation to write those poems, or is that something you've always done?
Well, I've written poems on and off, in between other writing that I've done. The motivation to write about politic poems about that involve politics was, I was trying to find a way to say things that were very difficult to say anyway, and maybe very difficult to say in other media. And I think honestly, that maybe maybe songs and music would be the best way to get a lot of these ideas across. And poetry is on the way to that. It's a kind of written music, I think. But it's not it's obviously, it's not a song. These are not songs, but there are there are ways that people communicate. Um, I think it goes right back to our origins, and narratives and poetry have always been a part of that. I don't know how they got pushed out exactly, but I think they did. They,
Yes.
it's certainly part of the British tradition, isn't it? It really is, and yet it's been so pushed out.
And I think deliberately, actually,
Yes,
to weaken and undermine human interaction,
yes,
and
absolutely.
also to remove anything that's uplifting. But we could talk about that a bit more maybe another
Okay,
time.
okay.
So, Lynn, if you will, read this lovely poem and then we can have a
Oh,
chat
thank
about
you,
it.
Brian. Okay. So the poem is called Forests of Deception. If I had known what lay beneath the forest, what lay beneath the fields of imported flowers, if I had only known the voices of the dispossessed, silenced by men of a certain class, lounging comfortably in overstuffed chairs, as befits a man of privilege, puffing on thick cigars as they drew arbitrary lines on a map of land not theirs to give away. And the land cried out, like raw meat bleeding beneath the butcher's knife. Now I hear them, children who spoke an unfamiliar language, mothers who dressed as our ancestors dressed. I hear the guns report. I smell the burning flesh. Those who survived still carry the keys to their stolen homes, hold dear in memory their martyred children. The saplings grew into trees, covered the buried villages in their green embrace. Signs were placed in unfamiliar lettering at every entrance and exit. A story was concocted, just like in a Hollywood movie. Lies became truth, truth became lies. Forests of deception, planted with alien seeds, but the earth still remembers. Is anything still true? Is anything even true anymore? What is the price of truth these days? Memories return like silenced ghosts under the watchful gaze of the sentinel stars, and through it all, the white bird flies across the concrete wall, still singing, still singing.
Lovely. Lynn, when did you actually write that?
Um, Very recently, maybe in the last few weeks.
Right. And what gave you the prompt, the stimulus to write that?
I don't really know. These things just seem to happen. I was also thinking of a poem that a friend wrote. He's a Palestinian from Jerusalem, and he he wrote about this white bird that he imagined um, flying across the barriers to the home he had grown up in, and that he's not allowed to ever go back to.
Yes.
And for some reason for an obvious reason that stuck in my mind that the bird can fly freely across these barriers, these man-made barriers, but but he's been exiled from his homeland. And I think that's where the bird that's possible. That's one reason the bird flies so freely at the end. But the bird is, of course, the bird of peace too, which we hope will one day reign in that land.
Really wonderful. And I do think that proper uplifting art, which poetry must be part of it, literature and art, yeah, has a job to play in trying to cut through what's happening. We've now not only got the tragedy of what's happening around Israel and Gaza, we've now got that expanding into Iran. And you clearly felt passionate about this. So really it's over to you. How do you feel from your background? How do you feel about what's now unfolding in the Middle East and with
Well,
Iran?
it's like a horror movie. The whole thing is like a horror movie that one can't switch off. And it's going 24 hours a day, and of course I have relatives in that part of the world, and I'm worried about them. And but what I feel is that there were basically at least two narratives going on with the founding of Israel. One was that the Jews fleeing the Nazis needed a homeland, a safe place, and so that was one part of it. But the other part that we see so clearly now is empire. That this was this beachhead into West Asia, and honestly, it doesn't seem to matter what happens to ordinary Israelis or to ordinary Iranians. It seems to me it's all about resources, oil, gas, like trade routes and so on. And everyone is getting mangled in this absolutely horrific situation. And it's coming home now to the Israelis who have actually been perpetrating so many terrible things, but now they are under fire too. Um, and maybe they had a full sense of security, that they were so superior and so on and so forth. So I'm no political analyst, honestly. I just uh, I hope that some calmer minds prevail, that there are some actors right now that who seem to be totally irrational, and there's a lot of real evil going on, and so I just hope that we don't all this doesn't like escalate into the Samson option or something really horrible like that. But we the people who seem to attain power are not the people who I would want to be in power. They're often very compromised people. So I
Yes.
guess I'm just like that. Those are my immediate thoughts.
Well, I also, watch what's happening and you think, yeah, somebody needs to press a button and stop it because it is just so outrageous. We have
Exactly.
we have the world stage, as many people like to use this expression, the world stage. And I look across the world stage, and what I don't see is any of the most prominent politicians in any of the key countries talking about peace and stopping the violence and getting people to talk.
No,
And I am here at the age I am. I don't like talking about my age because you get to that age where you don't. But here I am. I'm 70 years old. There, I've admitted it. And I think to myself that the people running my country, the United Kingdom, I just find them appalling. They don't have any key human values or attributes. They don't seem to have any kindness or sympathy or empathy in them. They seem to be full of an unprecedented greed for power and money, and they can never have enough of either of those. And they seem to have an unbelievable scorn for their own nation state. So if anybody says to me that, for example, Tony Blair or David Cameron or Keir Starmer actually believe in the country they live in, I don't think they do. I don't think they care a fig, is the expression, a fig for the people in UK. And then if I look at America and I look at the political class there, I see exactly the same attribute. I see this outrageous, raw aggression, which is all based around more power, more greed. We've got to have more assets. We've got to take over rare earth minerals in Ukraine. We've got to have the oil that's in the Middle East. There's no move towards a stabilization of relations with other countries, and trading, which, as with shopping, should be an enjoyable human interaction. We trade to get the things we need, but also we trade to interact and communicate and have a relationship with other people in other countries. But I don't see any of that. And then if I look into the Middle East, I see the same attributes in Israel. I see it in Ukraine. This cannot be accidental in my mind. This has been a calculated policy to put these defective people in positions of power. That's my take
yeah.
on it.
Oh, I think so, absolutely. And I think that the more corrupt and the more compromised someone is, the more the more they will do things that someone who has some integrity would not do, and so they're malleable to the deep state, to
Yes,
whatever the deep state policies are, and actually, when one goes back, like to documents like the Brookings Institute, Which Way to Persia, you can see this what's happening was already road mapped,
yes,
decades ago. It was road mapped. So we see it playing out and it looks like it's all spontaneous, but actually it's not. It can't be, because if it was, then why is it following the roadmap so closely?
yeah. This is a very key point. But of course, documents like that, uh, like the roadmap to Persia, sorry, to Persia that you mentioned, um, the average member of the public in UK or the US or Israel has no idea these documents exist. So it's all hidden in plain sight. It's actually occult behavior, but it's hidden in plain sight.
Cult behavior, that's very interesting, Brad, because goodness, that's something that would be interesting, that learning more about, and uh, you know uh, I'd like to know more about how how this is occult behavior.
Well,
um
I have just said that using the most simple terms, that what these horrible wicked people do is always hide what they're really doing from the wider nation state or from the wider public. So by nature of the fact that they are never telling us the truth or the exact truth, they're always hiding something, and the occult is all about the hidden. So if you say which side of the
Yeah.
line are they, they're always in the dark side.
Oh,
That's how I mean it.
occult. I,
Occult. Oh, as opposed to
okay.
a cult. Yes. What a
I
wonderful.
thought you said a cult,
Yes.
A-C-U-L-T, but you said occult, which is
Occult.
well, yes, absolutely. They think they're superior. They hold these meetings in secret, Chatham House rules and so on, and they have total contempt for us
Yes.
and want to get rid of a lot of us. So it's very, it's waking up to all this is quite horrifying. I can imagine that people don't want to go there.
I think
They
that
don't want to go there. They want to think, well, my government is looking out for me. I've heard people say, well, my MP would never let this happen, whatever it is that's happening,
yes,
or we'll write a letter and so on and so forth, and they don't realize that these decisions were made decades ago by people whose names we don't even know,
this is
and I
absolute.
don't even know, who's really in charge of anything.
Yeah, this is very true. Lynn, you've said to me several times that there are many people who are trying to speak out um, about what's happening in Israel. So they're Israelis, they're members of the Jewish community. What can you tell us about the people that clearly see through what national politics is doing in Israel or the US? Where do you see people speaking out?
Well, they're trying to speak out in different venues. They're very different. There are the people in Israel have got more and more marginalized. It seems like it's harder and harder to speak out there. It's quite dangerous, but it's also dangerous in in America and here. What can I tell you? They're all different. I think they need more exposure. I mean, for instance, this uh the idea of the one democratic state, people are talking like, Professor Jeffrey Sachs is talking all the time about or has been talking about the two-state solution, and anyone who looks at the what's been actually going on in Israel sees that it would be unworkable, but the voices who know about that are marginalized and silenced. So we're not getting the true story. I guess that goes back again to the fact that there's one narrative being fed, even in the alternative, like the dissidents are not always dissidents. They're like controlled opposition, and so it's kind of the fog of war, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where there are all these people speaking, and it's very hard to make out, what's the truth? Who can
Yes.
one trust? I mean, particularly now, particularly, what the hell is going on?
Yeah.
One day Israel says that it controls the skies over Iran, and the next day, you know, um, Iran like controls the skies over Israel. So we don't know what's going on unless we actually know someone or spend like 24 hours a day learning about it. We really don't know. And it's even must be even worse for people who don't like watch programs like UK Column and other like sources of information. If they get their information from whatever, the BBC, then I think they just live in a fantasy land.
Yeah.
Then
So are you you've
uh,
mentioned a name there as somebody who's speaking out. Are you able to tell us any more about organizations which are speaking out that you think are trustworthy?
well, I think I mentioned to you that well, the One Democratic State campaign is run by Israeli Jeff Halper, and he lives in Israel, and he's been working for years to try and um, advance this project of going back to a situation where it's everyone has equal rights in Israel, whatever their religion or ethnicity or whatever. And of course, while he's been doing that, we've been moving further and further from it, and
Yeah.
in a most horrifying way. So he's one person who I think has been doing such important work. And then there are people like a Palestinian professor, Mazin Kunze, I think that's how you pronounce his name. He's he talks all over the world, but he's been doing work on, the Botanical Institute that he runs there. And so that's, looking at the real history of the land. That's the truth is so important. Then I've worked with Jewish Voice for Peace in America. Um, and they've been, I think, what they've been doing is important. They're questioning a lot. They're questioning Zionism. They're questioning this war, and they're working for a better world, I think. I mean, every organization has its problems, and I don't endorse everything that they're doing, but they are. Um, that there are people here in the UK like Professor Chaim Brishy and Asa Winstanley and Matt Kennard. There's Loki. There's so many people. Craig Murray, all these people who are doing their part to try and illuminate this darkness that we're in, and it's impossible for any one person to keep up with it all, but those are just a few names that come to mind.
No, well, that's really excellent, Lynn. Thank you for mentioning those. As I started to talk about at the beginning of the interview with you, I have been trying for a very long time to engage more with um, Jewish people to understand more about what it is to be Jewish and how the Jewish community sees Israel. And then I found that this is a very difficult thing to do because there's a lot of reticence. There's clearly some fear about speaking, and you're going to upset the Israeli state or your fellow countrymen, and that's a thing which gives rise to anxiety. And then there's being speaking out, and that brings in criticism and attacks via media on what you have to say. So it has been a difficult one, but you have had the courage to speak to me, and you've also been kind enough to provide me with some links. So I very much hope that I'm going to be able to talk to some other people. My personal stance more and more is that I get upset when I hear a name used, a generic name, which is apparently where all the problem is. So this can be anything. It can be from people saying, well, it's the Conservatives, if we're talking UK, or it's Labour. And even if you do mention those political groups, and it's clear the political parties are not up to much that's good. It's never right to say that everybody who happens to be a member of Labour or Conservatives is actually part of the real cabal that's causing the problem. And then very often we have people highly critical of what America's doing in the world. It's Biden, it's the Americans. Um, this is this isn't right either. Biden might be problems, but to try and say that everybody in America is bad. And then we get the same thing with Israel. It's Israel. Well, what does that mean? Who are you talking about? You're talking about the government, or you're talking about the people? And if you're talking about the people, do they all agree? And we know that they don't all agree. So it seems to me the start to unpicking this horrible stuff that's going on is we've got to get dialogue going with people, and we've got to understand what the truth really is. And so
Mhm.
I have wanted for a very long time to be able to talk with people who understand more because of their birthright or experience living in Israel, what it's all about. And I can also say that I had an email this morning from a person who lived in UK for a very long time, but their background is they were born in Iran. And that person said, well, you have to understand that there are plenty of people in Iran at the moment who are not happy with their own regime. They don't want war, but they're not happy with their own regime. And so once again, and I did reply by saying, this is very interesting because, of course, if we going to get to the truth, we have to move through these labels. The Iranians are all bad and the Americans are good. Israel's bad and thing. It depends what we are talking about, and we have to qualify it.
I agree. I remember the first time that having been brainwashed myself, and I can tell you I was totally brainwashed at one time, really. But standing on a street corner and at a demonstration, and beside me was, I don't know whether he was Palestinian or Iranian, or anyway, he was one of the others who are, they're all bad, those people, and we're all good and we're superior and so on. And I thought, my goodness, I've never spoken to any of these people. I don't really
Mm.
know anything about them. And so I said to him, here we are standing next to each other, and I've never spoken to someone from wherever he was before, because I didn't know what else to say, and
Yeah.
I felt I needed to say something. And so we started talking, and he was just an ordinary person like me, we had a lot in common.
Yes.
And so that was where we started. But it's those first steps that are so difficult to take,
Yes. Yeah.
because
This, I think this is a really lovely point to end on, Lynn, because this is the meat of it. If we can get people talking to each other and understanding what's really inside them and what they really think, as opposed to what the world, the global mainstream media says, we will be doing very well.
absolutely, absolutely. And thank you for giving me this opportunity, because I do feel passionately about the whole thing. I really want to see peace. This is just such a horrible situation right now. So, um, no, I just hope that it gets resolved.
Yes. Well, we're all going to do our best to uh, to help that happen, and making a noise in the appropriate way is something we can all do, isn't it? We can all challenge the system.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's end there. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you. You're very welcome.